The murder novel I wrote became a bestseller, but now I must face the consequence of inspiring a serial killer. I'd always been hesitant to write on the genre that involves murder and violence. My sort of literature was always meant to target a family-friendly audience. However, the lack of sales had driven me to desperation. So, I tore my boundaries and published a book titled The Butterfly Murders. It started with the news of my wife's pregnancy and the stack of incoming bills to pay. She was recently fired from her job and rendered unable to find a new one in maternity, so the responsibility fell on me. To this day, I'm surprised that such a wonderful woman chose to endure a life with a man who couldn't guarantee fortune. Writing was my passion. Before the expecting of my child, I didn't exert as much effort into my other writings until now. Perhaps it was a combination of motivation and pressure that drove me. But even so, I could not find a publisher willing to take any of my dumb children's books. In desperation, I broke my code. Not for long. I did find a publisher, and before I knew it, my book went bestseller. I began to realize that people are naturally fascinated by violence. It's no wonder that the news is always updating us with war, despite the fact that statistics are telling us that we're getting closer and closer to world peace. But writing about a few murders wasn't enough. I had to be creative. People want ritualistic murders. People want creative murders. People want murder to be an art. What made my novel good was that I made my character a serial killer, an artist. In my book, I vividly described his style of murder, being a butterfly collector. His victims met the same demise similar to his collections. One morning, my wife and I watched the news, as always, expecting the same old celebrity garbage and complicated politics. The headline surprised us. A butcher was found dead in his own freezer room. Forensics experts added that he was drugged. That sounds like your novel, my wife said. Some butterfly collector knocks out and frees their specimens before mounting them, right? I guess, I replied. The news was shocking, but if you live long enough, you get to see and hear weird things. While murder will always be a part of the news, there will always be strange outliers. But it didn't stop there. A week later, another victim, a woman, was found lifeless on the streets. She was reported missing a few days prior. The cause of death was determined to be due to freezing. But what set the media abuzz when a victim was found inside a museum of moth and butterfly displays. The body was spread out flat, with his arms and legs bolted to a huge wooden board. Just like the previous victims, the victim died of freezing. At this point, suspicion of a serial killer on the loose came about. As more similar deaths got reported, people could not help but point out that they were similar to the nature in my novel. Naturally, I was investigated by police, and I could only shake my head with an "I don't know." The police then asked if there was any way to predict the serial killer. I remember the potential victims had to find a piece of butterfly net among their possessions. This is a serial killer's way of symbolizing their capture. The police thanked me before leaving. I felt rather guilty. For once in my life, I had accomplished something great, even earned a decent living for my family, and ended up creating a monster. "It's not your fault, dear," my wife told me in bed. "Sure it is," I said. "The serial killer took my story as a murder manual. It wasn't your intention." "It might as well be. I didn't want to write the story in the first place." "But you wrote it for our child, remember?" I was stunned. Despite the gruesome context of my work, It really was, in fact, dedicated to the future I wanted to protect. I cried a bit. Do you remember how we met? I asked. Yes, she blushed a bit. We were in high school at the time. Then we started sharing our interests, I continued. I wanted to become a school teacher while you wanted to become a writer for children's literature. We had a common goal. I smiled. To make a world a better place for children. We both laughed. I guess our real start to that goal was with our child, I said. She yawned a bit. It's a boy. We ended our conversation with a good night kiss. I had trouble sleeping. I dreamt that I was in the point of view of the serial killer. The image of a drugged victim and shoving him into a freezer felt real. I could feel the coldness which woke me up. My wife was sound asleep. I looked around the room and noticed that the window was open. No wonder why it felt so cold. Wait, I didn't lock the window? Immediately, I turned on the lights and grabbed a baseball bat. Honey, what are you doing? I hear my wife waking up. The window was open. I went around to inspect the house. Nothing seems to be taken, and there was no signs of intrusion. Dear, my wife spoke. I think I just left the window open to beat the heat, and that's all. I went back to bed, feeling reassured. But as I passed by, looking at some of our belongings to the bedroom table, I saw a torn piece of net. A butterfly net. I called the police. The next day, we had a few cops guarding our home. I was told that the cops were also watching over the areas with freezer rooms just in case. Citizens were also warned not to go out alone at night. I later contributed more info to the police regarding my fictional character's actions in relation to what the serial killer might do. Also, I told them, he might resort to suffocating his victims if he can't find a way to freeze them to death. My wife later dragged me into another room. Dear, she whispered, that wasn't in your book. What? Your character never did that. I pondered a bit. You're right. Didn't he wind up getting caught in an ambush as he tried to drug a still living victim? But he wouldn't want to repeat his mistakes, I replied. Her eyes widened. I just know how he'd think. Do you think your reader would know? I'm not sure. More days passed by, and there were no murders so far. I was still having those nightmares where I saw what the serial killer sees. And each time I woke up, I contributed more to the investigation, sometimes stating info that wasn't released to the public. I started growing anxious. Soon, my wife took notice. Are you all right? She asked. I'm fine, I replied. A butterfly flew inside our house, catching our attention. I caught it by its wing and stared at it. Are you sure you're all right? I ignored her. Put it down, I heard her say, but I continued to be fascinated by the creature. Snap out of it, she slapped me, and I dropped the butterfly, breaking its wing. I was suddenly overwhelmed by anger. I grabbed her by the neck. A few objects fell during the struggle, creating a ruckus. The police busted into our room and fired the stun gun at me. What's going on? I heard her cry as I fainted. All the evidence pointed to me. Fingerprints, DNA samples, everything. The police even found a frozen butterfly in my fridge. Tell us everything, the interrogator ordered. I confessed that the novel I wrote was based on a series of nightmares I had for quite a while now, even before I got married. Initially, it started with just a plain old massacres. But each time it repeated, new elements were added, giving it more complexity, which later inspired me to write the novel. I was hesitant to publish it. The idea was always in mind, but it was only until desperation came that I decided to release it. When asked about the series of murders that I supposedly committed, I replied that I only remembered them as dreams. The interrogator pointed out that the fictional character I wrote dreams of having a normal family, a wife, and a child that he always wanted. Interrogation ended, and eventually I had to wait for my sentence. The ordeal was growing too much for me. The most painful thought was that of leaving my wife behind. She was expected to give birth this month, and I may miss it. Reality begins to blur as I try to block out the pain. As they take me away, I can't help but reflect on my identity. Am I the writer who dreamt of being a serial killer? Or am I a serial killer who dreamt about being a writer?